Oh, hello. It is Monday, so we have another week of SAT practice before us. If you don't know who I am, if you haven't seen any of the other videos on my channel, my name is Kate. I am a college prep tutor. So what I do is I work with students on the SAT, the ACT, college applications, essays, all that stuff. And I also work with students on primarily high school classes, but I do teach K through 12. So English, history, psychology, anything humanities I can help you out with. So in this series, we are working through the SAT. I am also doing a series on the ACT if that is the test that you're prepping for. Last time we finished the College Board SAT practice test number 4, which is the first test on their website. They've since removed some of the older tests because they're no longer representative of the current test. So we're going to start today with number 5. This is actually the second test available on their website. All of these tests, if you want to try them out yourself or follow along with me, are available for free on the College Board website. So what we're going to do today is just see what all we have time for. We're going to do at least a couple of pages of this test today. We're just going to do the reading writing section. So can't help you with any math, but I'm happy to walk you through the reading and writing questions, kind of identify some strategies that might be useful, some reframes for how to approach these questions, and a methodology that you can take into your test day and feel really confident about. So, with that being said, let's get going. So I'm just going to scroll down here. I haven't seen this test before. I just do these totally live with you guys. And I'm just going to walk you through what I'm seeing as I'm seeing it. So we're just going to start with the very first question. And I mean, you can really tell that I haven't looked at this test before because I haven't even set up my pen. So today, why don't we do like a warm yellow orange kind of color. Okay, great. So I'm just going to take you through these questions. We'll go ahead and get started. So number 1, I'm already looking at the question, so I totally skip all this stuff at the beginning. I'm just going to look straight at the question down here. I'll make my pen a little less thick. There we go. And I'm already identifying that this is a vocabulary question, right? So we're looking for the word trace. So they've underlined it for us right here, so we don't even need to work that hard. If you're working on a timer, if you're doing a timed practice test or you're working on the actual test, I wouldn't even worry about all this stuff. It's not going to matter. It's nice to have, but you don't probably need it unless you are double checking yourself. If you're not sure, then oftentimes you can use context clues to adjust your answer. But in this case, we're just going to jump right to where the word is, and we're going to read a little bit around it just to see if we can figure out what it means. So it says, at supper time, Foxfoot would allow no fire to be built, no landing to be made, no trace of their passing to be left. Okay, so this is nice. We get an items in a series that kind of gives us more context. So this one is evidence because they're not wanting, clearly they're trying to hide from something, right? I don't know who Foxfoot is. I don't know anything about this story, but already just from reading this one sentence, I know that they're trying to be low key, right? Maybe they're on the run from something. Maybe they are, hiding from other people. And then if you actually go up here and read, yes, you can see they're guiding a group of fur traders who are traveling by canoe and suspects that they're being followed, right? So they're trying to not alert people to where they are. So long story short, that one is evidence. Number 2, This one says, which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? Okay, so precise is the keyword here. This is going to let you know it's a precision question. So precision kind of means accuracy. It's like slightly different, but that's what you're going to think about. Usually when you're studying for the SAT, you're going to see these paired as concision and precision questions. So if you have an SAT book that you're working through or Khan Academy or something like that, you're probably going to see those kinds of questions paired up. They're very similar. It's really just trying to get you to think about what's the best way to answer something. What is, the clearest way to do that. So if we're being precise, we want to, so we're really just thinking about what is the most precise way to do this. Okay, so this question says, which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? So because this is a precision question, we can just jump right into the sentence. So we know this is where the bar is. So it says, this is because the nose is the most blank part of a sculpture of a person's head. So we can look around for a little context. It says, many ancient sculptures are missing their noses, right? And then it says it's delicate and sticks out from the rest, so it's easy to break. So what we get from this is we are trying to come up with a word like fragile, right? So this is fragile pretty clearly. I mean, we even get a synonym here in delicate. So this is a real, like what I call a level 1 question. You don't need a lot of pre-work or multi-step processing to knock this question out pretty quickly. Okay, let's go ahead and do the next page. So this one, same deal. This is also a precision question. So you'll notice sometimes these are vocab type questions, and sometimes later on we're going to get into, structure, sentence structure type precision questions. But let's just knock this one out for right now. So here's the marker. It's right at the end. Preceding a flare, the corona temporarily exhibits increased brightness above the region where the flare is blank. Okay, so we kind of need to understand a little bit more about the structure of, this event before we answer this question. So let's just read it. It says, Katie Leica and colleagues found that the sun's corona provides an advance indication of solar flares, intense eruptions of electromagnetic radiation that emanate from active regions in the sun's photosphere and can interfere with telecommunications on Earth. Preceding a flare, the corona temporarily exhibits increased brightness above the region where the flare is blank. Okay, so we know that this is preceding a flare, right? So it's giving us a signal to say like, hey, the flare is about to happen, right? So this one is impending. If you're really going fast, you probably could have gotten this with just this word as your clue, but we've got time, you and I, so we'll just read around. So something that can be tricky about vocab questions, and I would say this is like a 1.52, right? Like usually I don't do 1.5s, but this I would say really relies on you knowing what these words mean. It's definitely more difficult than say like number 2 where the words are, elementary school level. This one, antecedent, something that comes after, so the direct opposite of preceding, right? Antecedent, you can see the same CED, part of the word there. So ante means coming after, and pre, of course, the prefix in the word prefix even, right, means coming before. So those are certainly not true. Or that one is certainly not true. Innocuous means like kind of ignorable, right? It's not harmful. It's just like a little thing that you don't need to worry about, right? But we know that this is a big problem, right? Intense eruptions that interfere with communications, right? So it's not going to be innocuous. And then perpetual means that it goes on forever, right? So this one is not true either, because we know that, first of all, it says temporarily. And then second of all, we can infer from this phrase intense eruptions and advance indication that they don't happen constantly. They occur sometimes, and therefore they are not perpetual. So that hopefully illuminates the issue in case you were struggling with those vocab words. So for number 4, this one is another precision vocab type question with a little more straightforward language down here. So let's just jump straight into the section of the text. So it says, to demonstrate that the integrity of underground metal pipes can be assessed without unearthing the pipes, engineer Aroba Salim and colleagues blank the tendency of some metals' internal magnetic fields to alter under stress. The team showed that such alterations can be measured from a distance and can reveal concentrations of stress in the pipes. Okay, so we know that what they're going to do is demonstrate something. And so they're going to, so in order to demonstrate this, these folks are going to, let's see, hypothesize about something, but probably not. They would have already hypothesized if they're at the demonstrable phase, right? So discounted, this would be more in the evaluation section of a paper like this, right? Like if they're discounting something, they're not counting something that should be counted. So redefined, this would be the case if they were editing something about it, but they're not. This one is exploited. They're using it for their gain, right? In order to demonstrate something, they're exploiting the tendency of some metals' internal magnetic fields to alter under stress. So they are figuring out how they work so that they can use them for their own purposes. Okay, number 5, same deal, logical and precise. So this says, to blank this situation, it's necessary to actively recruit subjects from diverse backgrounds and locations. Okay, so just looking at the options, I've already picked one that I think is what it is. I'm going to hypothesize that this one is ameliorate, which means, if you're not familiar with this word, means to make something better. So like if you've got a problem, you can do, something solution-oriented to ameliorate the problem. But we don't really know if there's a problem yet, so let's just, scan through the text here. So, despite the generalizations about human behavior they've produced, many studies of behavioral psychology have used highly unrepresentative subject pools. So I'm already getting the sense that there's a problem here, right? Students at the colleges and universities where the researchers are employed. To blank this situation, yeah, this one's ameliorate for sure, just to help fix. Okay, this one is interesting. This one is a purpose question, so this we haven't seen yet in this test. So purpose is a much broader type of question than what we have been looking at so far, but that's okay. We're not scared of it, right? So purpose means we're going to have to do a little bit more reading, but we're probably going to get something like a statement of purpose or an inference about the purpose in the very beginning or the very end of a passage. This is just one paragraph, so that's more useful on longer passages, but let me just take a look at what we have here. So it says, the college is organizing the freshman basketball team, and there's just a chance that I shall make it. I'm little, of course, but terribly quick and wiry and tough. While the others are hopping about in the air, I can dodge under their feet and grab the ball. Okay, so what I'm going to do strategically when I read this question is, I know we're looking for purpose. So because I've read the question first, that's step 1, read the question first and figure out what type of question that is. That's step number 2. Step number 3 is read your material, or skim it if you can, but read enough of it that you get a sense of what's going on. So we've done that now. Step 4 is to make a prediction. So you are going to come up with what you think the answer should sound like. So what I think the purpose of this paragraph is is to, you know, think about or to inform someone of this person's belief about themselves, that they have a unique value to them, right? Like if they are trying out for the basketball team, they believe that they have something special to offer and they want to tell people why they might make the basketball team. The reason is that, right? So let's look at our options. So to compare basketball with other sports, I don't think so. They're not really describing, the rules of basketball or anything. B, to provide details of how to play basketball, same deal, not really. C, to state how players will be chosen for the basketball team. So this would be closer, right? But it's not quite right because it's not talking about any other players besides this main person, other than to make this very general statement that like most of the people are tall except for this person. I don't know if it's a woman or a man, but to be honest, it's 1912. It's probably a man. I was reading it as a woman in my head, though. But anyway, D, to explain why the narrator thinks she might make the... Oh, great. Perfect. Okay, it is a woman. So to explain why the narrator thinks she might make the basketball team. It's this one, right? That's basically what we said. She's trying to tell someone why she thinks she might make it. So this one is D. Great. Number 7. In the late 1800s, Spanish language newspapers flourished in cities across Texas. Okay, so this is again a purpose question, so I'm just going to first check out the first sentence like I just did to see if there's anything going on there. I'm also going to check out the last sentence since this is a longer passage. It's still just a paragraph, but you get me here. So we just read the first sentence. Here's the last one. Thus, it is unsurprising that this city became such a rich site for Spanish language journalism. Okay, so if I'm like rushing through this test, right? If I like spent way too long on one of those graph questions or something like that at the beginning, and I'm like, hitting the end of my time and I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I might have to skimp on some of these questions. Here's how I would do it. I would read the first sentence and the last sentence, which is what I just did. And then from the last sentence, I'm going to make a prediction. The prediction I would make before I even read the answer choices is to say that this is a paragraph detailing how whatever city this is became such a rich site for Spanish language journalism, right? Because they're summing it up very nicely for us at the bottom. So probably we're going to look for something like that in the answer choices. So A, I'm just going to like pretend like I'm not going to read the rest of it and we're going to make a quick guess and then we'll go back through and double check whether or not our quick answer was correct. So A, to compare Spanish language newspapers published in Texas today with ones published there during the late 1800s. I don't think it's probably this just because the last sentence says, sort of puts the city at the forefront. I think we probably want to think about the location and what happened there rather than what happened there sub the location, right? B says to explain that Spanish language newspapers thrived in Texas and especially El Paso during the late 1800s. Okay, that seems fine, right? Like that makes sense compared to the last sentence there. C says to argue that Spanish language newspapers published in El Paso influenced the ones published in San Antonio during the late 1800s. This is probably a byproduct of B, right? So this would be something that I would use as evidence for B. Therefore, I don't think that C is going to be the purpose. I think if I'm thinking like a test writer, which is something I always tell my students to do, these answer choices don't come out of nowhere, right? They're being written by people. Hopefully for the time being, they're being written by people anyway. So when you're a person writing a test, you're going to come up with, a few ways to help you get at certain answer choices, right? You're not just like hitting a random generator. So you're going to say, maybe there's one thing that's, too narrow, right? So that would be C in this case. It's maybe like one of the points, but it's not the whole picture. Then you're going to say there's something that's too broad, right? So this one, just like looking ahead, this might be D, to explain why Spanish language newspapers published in Texas were so popular in Mexico during the late 1800s. That might go outside of the scope of what this paragraph is talking about, since it sounds like they're specifically talking about a city in Texas and not anything broader than that, right? So if they're expanding the reach of the purpose into Mexico, it might be too broad, right? So I'll just type this out for you guys. So like if we say something like too broad, okay? And then this one, this one down here, C, too specific, right? I might say that. Then of course there's going to be the correct answer, right? And then there's going to be something that is technically correct or mostly correct, but still off somehow. Okay. So these ones are going to be the ones that they're thinking if you're rushing through the test, you might get hung up on that. Okay. For example, the first half of the answer choice might be correct, but the second half might be wrong, or it might be inverted, right? Like it might say something like, San Antonio is the best city for newspapers instead of El Paso or something like that. But you wouldn't know that if you were rushing, right? So you're going to kind of just judge the truth value of an answer choice like that rather than the scope. So this one I'm pretty sure is B. So let me get my pencil back. So this one would be the correct answer, I'm pretty sure. But I am going to just read the paragraph for you guys so that you can see alongside me if that's true. Okay, so it says, in the late 1800s, Spanish language newspapers flourished in cities across Texas. San Antonio alone produced 11 newspapers in Spanish between 1890 and 1900. But El Paso surpassed all other cities in the state. Ding, ding, ding. This city produced 22 newspapers in Spanish during that period. El Paso is located on the border with Mexico and has always had a large population of Spanish speakers. Thus, it's unsurprising that this city became such a rich site for Spanish language journalism. Okay. So let's just evaluate our answer choices here. So A says to compare Spanish language newspapers published in Texas today. So we're really not comparing the modern. So I would even say this one might be too specific, right? Or it's certainly comparing. I'm going to stick with my mostly correct because it's certainly comparing something. It's comparing very briefly San Antonio versus El Paso. But it's not comparing the ones today with the ones published during that time, right? So that's how it's mostly correct, but not always correct, or not all the way correct. Okay? So that's what you're going to be looking for. B, to explain that Spanish language newspapers thrived in Texas and especially El Paso during the late 1800s. I still believe that's the answer because it's not really making any arguments, right? So this one I don't like because it's honestly, it's too short. This is clearly like an intro paragraph to something. So we're not at the argumentation part. So even if I'm just looking at explain, argue, and compare, I'm immediately crossing off C to argue. Okay. Oops, that's highlight, not draw. Boop. Okay, so then it says to explain why Spanish language newspapers published in Texas were so popular in Mexico. Yeah, so that one doesn't even discuss, they mention Mexico because they say like that's why they have Spanish speaking newspapers, why they publish them so prolifically, but it's just wrong, right? But if you glance and you see the word Mexico, you might think like, oh, boom, let's put Mexico in there. But that's not the strategy you should use. So hopefully that makes a little sense, and that's like a good framework for you to use when you're doing your test. Number 8, let's see. This one says, which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence in the text as a whole? Yeah, so this is, really like a structural question, but it's more than that too, right? So they want you to think about, what is the structure of a paragraph? What is the structure of maybe an argument? And then it's also kind of like a mini purpose question, right? Like, what is the purpose of this part? So we have this kind of macro, like, what's the purpose of this paragraph or this passage entirely? And then, like, what's the purpose of this piece, right? Like this sentence, or even sometimes this word, right? But in order to evaluate that appropriately, you often do need to also have some literacy around what is the appropriate, structure of a paragraph or the appropriate structure of a passage. So let's take a look. So it says, for these ones, we're going to need to read the whole thing. That's the kicker. So it says, Chile's Atacama Desert is one of the driest places on Earth. Mary Beth Wilhelm and other astrobiologists search for life or its remains in this harsh place because the desert closely mirrors the extreme environment on Mars. Okay, so I'm already, just based on where it is in the paragraph, I'm already thinking this is like more exposition or introduction than it is, like evidence and argument, right? So let's just hold on to that thought. The algae and bacteria found in Atacama's driest regions may offer clues about Martian life. By studying how these and other microorganisms survive in such extreme conditions on Earth, Wilhelm's team hopes to determine whether similar life might have existed on Mars and to develop the best tools to look for the evidence of it. Okay, so I'm going to make a prediction. Same strat as before, right? I'm going to predict that this is an explanation. So the first sentence is telling us, where are we, right? So that's kind of the real exposition. We're in Chile. We're at the Atacama Desert. What's something about it? Like, what's another thing about it, right? It's really dry, okay? And then it's like, why should I care about that? So the second sentence answers that question for me. Why should I care about this desert, right? In this case, one of the reasons I should care about it is because astrobiologists can study it to imitate the environment on Mars and thus learn more about Mars, right? So I'm expecting that the answer is going to be something like, it tells me why I should care. Why do we use this desert in astrobiology? So let's take a look at the answer choices. So it says A, to contrast the conditions in the Atacama Desert with those on Mars. So they're actually not contrasting it, right? They're creating a similarity. So that's not correct. They are comparing it, but they are not contrasting it. So don't mess that up if you're like rushing through the test, right? B says to explain why many life forms cannot survive in the Atacama Desert. So this is a classic example of too narrow, right? It's not just about the life forms. It's also about this application that they can study, Mars by studying the Atacama Desert, ideally, right? Or allegedly. It's also just not true because they don't really talk about why life forms can't survive. They just say like, it's dry, right? But yeah, like in the typical structure, this would be a too narrow answer. C says to indicate why astrobiologists chose to conduct research in the Atacama Desert. Okay, this is basically what we said, right? So I'm going to go with C on this one, but I'm just going to read D to you guys anyway. So it says to describe certain limitations to conducting scientific study in the Atacama Desert. So this one, like as is typical, right, is if you're going to be stuck between two answers, you're going to be stuck between C and D probably. The psychology behind this is really that, so obviously C is correct. So you're kind of probably leaning, in that direction one way or another. And then a reason that you might entertain something like D is because it does describe, okay, Sure, it's telling us why we should care. They do mention limitations to conducting scientific study, such as like extreme conditions, right? It's one of the driest places on Earth. They are conducting scientific study in the Atacama Desert, right? So like truth value wise, sure, it's reasonable, right? And this is when you have to think about which choice best describes. It's not just that it is describing it, it's which one best describes it. So the way I would get around this is by saying like, at this point, we aren't getting into the nitty gritty of like, what are the limitations for study? We're getting into the limitations of life in this area, but there's no details, right? It's just like, it's hard to live there. Why should I care about that? Well, because it can tell us how to live, or like how creatures live in other hard to survive environments, right? So they are noting, maybe like foreshadowing some limitations, but it's not quite right. It's slightly off. So I would expect D to be the purpose of maybe the next paragraph, right? They might say something like, okay, so Wilhelm's team hopes to determine whether similar life might have existed on Mars and to develop the best tools to look for evidence of it. But it's not a walk in the park. It's really dry there and they can't have a long field season, right? Blah, 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 right? So that might be your brain is filling in something for you, and you might, in a moment of stress, like taking a standardized test, think like, oh, that actually has some merit to it. Like maybe I should second guess myself. Don't. It's C. Like, so your brain is working in the right direction, but it's working too hard. Okay, we're going to do this as the last page, and then I'll be back. So let's see. Number 9 is same kind of question. So function of the underlined portion in the text as a whole. So this one is the last sentence, or even just part of the last sentence. So already this is probably going to serve a very different function than the previous sentence did. So as we saw in earlier questions, sometimes broad concepts, and not even sometimes, very often, broad concepts like purpose or goal or universal idea, something like responsibility or, justice, things like that. Really broad concepts are explored or indicated in the last sentence of a paragraph or a passage. So I am going to make a prediction before I've even read literally a single word of this, that this is going to have some kind of implication to it, or some kind of broadening, impact statement. Okay, so let's just read it and see if we're right. So it says, more than 60% of journeys in Mexico City occur via public transit, but simply reproducing a feature of the city's transit system, e.g. its low fares, is unlikely to induce a significant increase in another city's transit ridership. As Eric Guerra et al. Have shown, transportation mode choice in urban areas of Mexico is the product of a complex mix of factors, including population density, the spatial distribution of jobs, and demographic characteristics of individuals. System features do affect ridership, of course, but there is an irreducibly contextual dimension of transportation mode choice. So this kind of summarizes what they had already said, right? Like, there's lots of different reasons that people choose to take or not take public transit. It's not always like, how expensive is it, right? How clean are the trains? These kind of features of the system itself. It's really about like, how much money do people have? Do they prefer to drive to work? Where is their job, right? Like, where do they live relative to their job? So they're basically saying, while system features are, important, they're not the most significant factor. And indeed, there are, you might not be able to produce the same results in any city. There are things specific to Mexico City that impact ridership. So where do people live? Where do people work, etc. That's why they say it's contextual. Okay, so let's go through the answer choices. A says, it presents an objection to the argument of Guerra et al. About transportation mode choice in urban areas of Mexico. So let's see, is it an objection? So it says, as Eric Guerra et al. Have shown, transportation mode choice is the product of a complex mix of factors. So it's not opposing that view at all. It's corroborating it, right? So let's go to B. It explains why it is challenging to influence transit ridership solely by altering characteristics of a transit system. I like this because it says, it's not just about system features, it's grouping system features as this category of interest. And then it's saying like there's all this other noise in the data as well. So that's kind of correctly, this answer choice is kind of correctly assessing what the paragraph is comparing or considering. So I like B. Let's hold on to it. C says it illustrates the claim that a characteristic associated with high transit ridership in Mexico City is not associated with high transit ridership elsewhere. So this is implied, right? That like certainly another city, I don't know, like Denver, might have different weather patterns, right? And so people might be more willing to ride transit in the colder months in Denver, whereas like if it never has like 4 feet of snow in Mexico City, like that push might not be there, right? You could always theoretically safely drive in Mexico City, something like this, right? But again, that's our brain connecting to the next point that we're expecting to see, as opposed to seeing what we actually see in the text. So when I was explaining my prediction about this this sentence, or when I was, sort of summarizing it for you, I did mention it might not be able to be applied in every city because the use of the word contextual implies that. But what it doesn't do is illustrate that claim. That's not the claim, right? The claim is it's challenging to change ridership when you only have control over the system. Okay? So D says it substantiates the assertion that population density, the spatial distribution of jobs, and demographic characteristics are important factors in transportation mode choice. So again, this is true, right? It's like they are important, but the larger point is this comparative point. So they're not only making this one note observation that like it's complicated, right? They're saying like from the position of, the city, as presumably backed by Guerra's research, it's really not only about what you can control, it's also these other things. So this one is B. Okay, number 10, overall structure of the text it wants us to find. So this is another one where we're going to have to read the whole thing. And this is also another one where you are expected to have some level of working literacy about what does a paragraph look like? What makes a paragraph function? Okay? So let's read it. Changes to vegetation cover and other human activities influence carbon and nitrogen levels in soil, though how deep these effects extend is unclear. Hypothesizing that differences in land use led to differences in carbon and nitrogen levels that are not restricted to the topsoil layers, 0 to 30 centimeters deep, and then I'm going to butcher this person's name, I'm so sorry, Chukwuebuka Okolo and colleagues sampled soils across multiple land use types, e.g. grazing land, cropland, and forest, within each of several Ethiopian locations. They found, though, that across land use types, carbon and nitrogen decreased to comparably low levels beyond depths of 30 centimeters. Okay. We don't need to understand what this paragraph is telling us about all the science. Just in case you were thinking like, I don't know anything about nitrogen and carbon, or like, I didn't understand the relationship of okay, doesn't matter, right? It's helpful, but it doesn't matter. All we care about is what is the structure of the paragraph? Like, what are the functions of the sentences? Okay. So, first of all, it says something like changes to vegetation cover, blah, 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 and other things influence these levels in soil, but we're not really sure how much. Okay. So this identifies a problem, or it identifies at least an area of uncertainty in the field. Okay. So we're first identifying the issue. The next sentence says, hypothesizing that differences in land use lead to differences in carbon and nitrogen levels that are not restricted to the topsoil layer. Let's see. I'm just trying to summarize this for you. So they're explaining a Colo and colleagues' hypothesis. Okay? So we identify the problem, we introduce the hypothesis, and then in the last sentence, they found, though, that across land use, we discuss results. Or we introduce results, right? We're not necessarily saying like, and then here's all the implications of that and blah, 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 right? Or like, here's how we got there. It's just saying like, this is what they found, okay? So you'll notice this is very different from a paragraph that's maybe like argumentation, right? There's no evidence yet. There's no argumentation. There's no counterclaim. There's just problem, hypothesis, results. Okay, so let's just look at the answer choices and see which one follows that structure. Also, I will say this is a very, very, very common structure for pop science writing or like any science writing. So like, for example, when I was in my undergrad and I had to write scientific papers, this is the structure you use, right? Like, tell me about the problem. What do you think is going to solve it? Here's all my methodology, which of course like would come later in this paper. Like, here's how I figured out this result, and then here's the result, and then what it is, and then maybe what I would do in the future. If I had more time, right? Here's some other interesting factors that I would explore. So if you see a science paragraph, you might immediately think like, let me test it for, introduction of problem, hypothesis, result. Okay, so A says it describes a phenomenon that scientists do not fully understand. So problem, explains a research team's hypothesis about that phenomenon, hypothesis, and then describes a finding that led the team to refine the hypothesis. And it is true that the hypothesis wasn't entirely correct, right? Because they said they found, though, that implying that the hypothesis was not entirely 100% there. So A, I'm already really liking. B says it introduces an unresolved scientific question. Okay, presents a research team's hypothesis pertaining to that question. Sure, and then describes an observation made by the team that conflicts with that hypothesis. Okay, so I can already hear you thinking like, that's the same. Let's hold on to it and we'll talk about it. C, it discusses a process that scientists are somewhat unclear about, introduces competing hypotheses about that process, and then explains how a research team concluded that one of those hypotheses is likely correct. Okay, so this one I don't like. The immediate reason is because, like, sure, it has the same, like, intro hypothesis result, but it says it's multiple hypotheses and it's not. Yes, there are multiple colleagues, but they're writing one paper, like they're producing the same result. Okay. So C is out. D says it explains a hypothesis that has been the subject of scientific debate, discusses how a research team tested that hypothesis, and then presents data the team collected that validate the hypothesis. Okay, this one is also not true. And when I was giving you the overview of the structure of a scientific paper, I mentioned that they skip the methodology section here because this is the intro. How a research team tested that hypothesis would be the methodology section. How did you do it? That's what methodology means, right? So not true. Okay. So now we need to figure out what's the difference between A and B, okay? So in my opinion, the strongest difference is this last part. It describes a finding that led the team to refine the hypothesis, as opposed to describes an observation made by the team that conflicts with the hypothesis, Okay, let's review. So it says they think the hypothesis is differences in land use lead to differences in carbon and nitrogen levels that are not restricted to the topsoil layer. Okay, so they think the reason for these changes is differences in land use. Okay. So what they did is within several, they found though that across land use types, carbon and nitrogen decreased to comparably low levels beyond depths of 30 centimeters. Okay, so let's see what we got. Across land use types, carbon and nitrogen decreased to comparably low levels. So this suggests that the varying land use didn't really affect it as much as they thought it would, right? So no matter what they're using the land for, it's still like hitting the same barrier, same marker at the end. So this one, I believe, is B, because it doesn't really go as far as to say that they refined the hypothesis or how they changed it. They just say, oh, like this weird thing came up in the results. Great, and then presumably in the next round of testing, they will refine the hypothesis. Okay, so that is the first 10 questions of the SAT practice test number 5. So I hope you enjoyed following along today. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. If you want to request a particular test, or even a particular section or a particular question, please let me know in the comments as well. I'm happy to answer specific requests. Anything else, you can find me on my website. It's stembrainstutor.com. You can also find me on Instagram. The username is yourhumanitiestutor. All right. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.